Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. Over the last few videos, we've been creating this little environment where we have this character, and the character can move around within the limited bounds of the environment. But there's been a problem, which I haven't mentioned so far, but which if you've been following these videos, you certainly will have seen, and that is that it looks very flickery. And the reason it looks very flickery is because every time the character moves to a different square, and each one of these, there are 25 squares on this little window here. So obviously they'll be moving quite frequently. Every time they move, the system is starting with a blank screen and recreating the whole thing again. And so we need a way to stop it doing that, to have it to stop it sort of starting from scratch, so that we don't get that flickeriness. And that is what I've done. So if you look now, you can see that she can move around, and we can click as fast as we like, but it never looks, we don't get that sort of fluttery, flickering sort of effect that you can very much notice in the previous videos, and that would have made it basically impossible to play this game, because of course in a game of this type you're generally going to be sort of moving quite quickly. You want to be clicking, like you're not sort of clicking. It's not like a board game where you click and then sort of stop for a few minutes, and you're doing this, and if it's going to flicker, it's going to be sort of impossible to stand. So that's what I have done. Let's have a look at the code that allows that to happen. So if you're going to download the files from itch.io, the link from the link that is in the description of this video, you should know that I've changed the name of the folder where the material related to these recent videos is stored. It's now called tile-based display. If you were to download the files from itch.io and go and unzip it and then go to the top level of the folder, you would see all these different subfolders, and the one you want for this particular set of videos is tile-based display. And then once you get in there, we have graphics without gaps, which is just a demonstration of how to print the little squares without there being black lines in between them. And then we have moving around, which is what we've been working on for the last couple of videos. All right, so anyway, let's have a look at the code. So briefly, there are two new things that I'm going to have to talk about. One is IDs, and the other is the command replace. So we had a HTML table which encompassed all of the code on this page, and what we've done is we've put that table inside this paragraph command, and we've put this thing that is new to us within that div. So we have less than div space id equals quote WHOLE quote greater than. So what does that do? Well, that is a HTML command, whereas replace is a Twine specific command. And you can tell that because this is within one set of less thans and greater thans, whereas replace is within two sets of less thans and greater thans. And what it does is it says, call this point on the page on the HTML page, because remember what Twine is doing is creating HTML pages. Call this point on the HTML page whatever's within these quotes. So in this case, WHOLE, but of course I could have used virtually anything. There were probably some sort of reserved words for commands that I couldn't put in there, but basically I could have called it anything. And if I then later refer to hashtag WHOL, actually within quotes, if I ever refer to hashtag WHOLE in quotes, then you'll know that I mean this point here. And this particular point is right at the beginning of the page, but it doesn't have to be. So for example, let's say we had a logo. So we might have a centered logo. So div align equals center img art slash big logo.png slash div, and then we have a couple of line breaks, and then we have the beginning of the HTML table. Well, I might have decided, all right, I'll give this point, the point in between after the big logo and a couple of line breaks, but before the HTML table, call that WHOLE. And that is what replace is going to use. It relies on knowing a particular sort of point in the page. So we have a div ID equals WHOLE, and we have the table. It's a 3x3 grid, so like a noughts and crosses board or tic-tac-toe board, albeit the center square is much bigger than all the others, and in fact that whole 5x5 square display is in the center square. That's not multiple squares of the HTML table. So we have the table, we have the first row, we have an empty cell, which is the corner. We have this cell here where it asks a question. It says if $E $CX $CY plus 1 is equal to 1, then we're going to do one thing, and if it's not the case, we're going to do another thing. What this means, if $E CX CY plus 1 is equal to 1, in sort of more plain English, that means if the square immediately to the north of the character is a wall. $CX and $CY are is the current position of the character, and E is a two-dimensional array that keeps track of whether a given square is open or wall. At the moment we have only two possibilities, and a value of 1 indicates a wall. So all this means is if the square immediately to the character's north is a wall, which means, of course, they can't go north, then we do this. And if it's not a wall, then they can go north, and therefore we do this, which is the button to go north. Now, I've slightly changed this. This used to be just an image, and I've changed it to a button. And you might, if you know what buttons do, be wondering why. Because normally a button does stuff if it's clicked. It executes some code if the player clicks it, and or sends the player to a different page. And this one doesn't do either. It's just a button with a title, which is double dash. It doesn't have any text after that, so that it doesn't send you anywhere. And there's nothing in between the button and the slash button, so there's no code that executes. So what is the point of having a button that sort of doesn't do any of the things that a button does? Well, the answer is because this one needs to be a button. In other words, it needs to be a button if the player can go north. And when I had it as not a button, I found it difficult to get the height the same. So it was different. In other words, the height of the picture was different to the height of the button, and that meant that everything else was out of whack. And that meant that the main environment was sort of wobbling up and down depending on what was to the north of the character. And because of the buttons to the west and the east, similar things were happening. It was sort of slightly wobbling from side to side. So actually, I think it would have been just because of the button to the west. It was sort of wobbling slightly from side to side, and that looks very, very amateur and very bad. You want everything to stay still. So the easiest way to do that was to say, well, we'll make them both buttons, even though one's kind of a useless button. So we have this button, this possibility, which is what happens if the player can go north. We have a button, or less than, button space, quote, capital N, quote, and again, there's no text over here, which means that clicking the button doesn't send you anywhere. We're not going to a new page, because if we went to a new page, we'd get the blank page and the reloading of everything from scratch, and that is the thing that we are trying to avoid. So instead, we have all this code that executes within, or that executes on the same page if the player presses that button. And here's what the code does. Set CY++, in other words, the character's Y coordinate goes up by 1, because that's what happens when you go north. Set $D equal to, quote, lowercase n, end quote. That's used so that the program knows which graphic to display, because we want a different graphic if the player's going right, left, up and down. And then this is the new thing. We have less than, replace, space, quote, hashtag, WHOLE, quote, greater than, include display, and then slash replace. So what this is saying is, don't start a new page, but we are going to overwrite a part of this page. And what part of this page are we going to overwrite? Well, we're going to overwrite the part of the page that starts from hashtag whole. In other words, it's this bit up here. Well, that's the beginning of the page. So we sort of are redoing the whole page, but we're sort of cheating. We're cheating the system a bit. It sort of thinks that it's only rewriting part of the page, and therefore it doesn't need to kind of fully. I don't know exactly what the graphics are doing, but it seems like it doesn't sort of start from scratch in quite the same way, and therefore you don't have that blank, that moment of a black screen. So we're going to replace whole, and how are we going to replace whole? Well, we're going to include display. In other words, we're going to include this whole page. So we're replacing this whole page with this whole page, and that's basically the same thing as saying, as if we just said include display, or perhaps go to display. But again, the system doesn't treat it the same way. It doesn't seem to start from scratch in exactly the same way, and we don't have that black flickering. So there are 3 other buttons, of course, because as well as going north, we can go south, west, or east. They are essentially the same. This text will be different. This will be different because it's a different, moving in a different direction has a different effect on your X and Y coordinates, of course. And the graphic that we display will be different, and therefore this $D needs to be different. But this bit will be exactly the same. So it's sort of it's sort of almost cheating the system. We're saying, oh, no, we're not starting a new page. We're just replacing part of the page with something else. But the part of the page we're replacing is the whole page, and the thing we're replacing it with is the whole page. But that is good enough to stop it from reloading from scratch and flickering. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.